This is the story of the Talking Eggs by Robert Sansuzi. There was once a little girl named Blanche, and she lived out in a cabin in the woods. And she lived with her mother and sister. Now, her mother and sister were very lazy and very mean. And Blanche, on the other hand, was very kind and very good-hearted and very smart. Blanche's mother and sister made her do all the work around the house because they were so lazy. And as she was doing the work, they would sit on the porch in the shade and fan themselves and talk about moving to the city and living like fine ladies. One day, they send Blanche out to the woods to get some water from the well. And while Blanche is at the well, she runs into an old woman. And the old woman says, "Oh, please, child, I'm so tired. I'm so hot. Could you give me some water, please?" And Blanche sees that the old woman is very weak. And she says, "Yes, of course, I'll get you some water." And she gets her some water. And the old woman says, "Bless you, child, you have a good heart." So Blanche takes the water and she goes back to her home and she gives it to her mother and her sister. But her mother and her sister are angry because the water has gotten warm. And they throw the water on the ground and they yell at her. And her mother says, "Here, all your sister wants is a cool drop of water, and you can't even bring her that thing." And they continue to yell at Blanche, and she runs into the woods and she's crying. And the old woman happens to walk by again. And the old woman says, "Why are you crying, child?" And Blanche says, "Well, my mother and sister lit into me because I brought them water that was warm." And the old woman says, "Well, honey, you just come to my house, and I'll give you a fine meal and a nice, clean bed to sleep in. On one condition, though." And Blanche says, "Well, what's the condition?" And the old woman says, "No matter what you see, you have to promise that you won't laugh at anything." And Blanche says, "Yes, I promise I won't laugh." So the old woman and Blanche begin walking through the woods. And as they go through the woods, the trees part in front of them and then close up again behind them. And finally, they reach the old woman's house. And the first thing that Blanche sees when she gets to the house is a two-headed cow with corkscrew horns that brays like a mule. And Blanche is very surprised at this. She's never seen anything like this. But she doesn't laugh because she's afraid that she'll hurt the old woman's feelings. And the next thing that Blanche sees are chickens of every color that you can imagine, hopping around on 1 foot or 3 feet or 4 feet. And they whistle like mockingbirds instead of clucking like chickens. So this also surprises Blanche, but she doesn't laugh because she remembered the promise that she made to the old woman. So the old woman takes her inside and she asks Blanche to start a fire, which Blanche does. As Blanche is lighting the fire, the old woman takes her head off and she sets the head on her lap like a pumpkin, and she begins to comb her hair out. And Blanche is very surprised at this. She's never seen such a thing. But till this point, the old woman's been very nice to her, so Blanche just continues lighting the fire. And after a while, after the fire is lit, the old woman says, "Oh, well, that's better." And she puts her head back on her shoulders. And then she hands Blanche a beef bone. And it's a very thin bone, and it doesn't look like there's any meat on it at all. But she hands it to Blanche, and she says, "Put this in a pot and boil it with some water." Now, Blanche is a little skeptical about this. She doesn't know if this will work, but she does as the old woman says. And she turns to the woman to say, "Is this going to work?" But when she asks her, the old woman says, "Well, look at the pot." And as she looks at the pot, there's soup overflowing from it, and it's a nice thick soup. Then the old woman hands Blanche a single grain of rice, and she says, "Grind this into mortar. Grind this with the mortar." And so Blanche feels very silly, but she begins to pound the 1 grain of rice, and soon it's overflowing with rice, and there's plenty of food for them to eat. So they have a wonderful dinner, and afterward, the old woman says, "Oh, it looks like a nice moonshiny night," and so she invites Blanche to go outside, and when they go outside, there's a tall rabbit, and he is dressed in little knickers and a vest, and he's playing the banjo. And there are rabbits everywhere, and they're all dressed up in fine clothes, and they're all dancing around. They did the cakewalk and the Victorian reel and a two-step, and they're having a wonderful time, and Blanche claps her hands, and the old lady hums along, and it was the most magical, wonderful night that Blanche had ever spent. So then, when the rabbits are done dancing, they go inside and go to bed. Now in the morning, the old woman tells Blanche to go and milk the cow. And so Blanche goes out and milks the cow, and she was very nice to the cow, and the cow remembered. So the milk that Blanche got was the sweetest milk she had ever had, and they put it in their morning coffee, and it was wonderful. And while Blanche was doing the breakfast dishes, the old woman said, she said, "Now, child, you have a good heart, and things are going to get better for you from here on out. And because you've been such a good girl, I'm going to give you a present. And here's what you have to do. You have to go out to the chicken coop, and any eggs that say 'take me,' you can take those eggs. But any eggs that say 'don't take me,' don't take those eggs." And so Blanche does as she's told. She goes out to the chicken hut, and she sees all these eggs, and only the plain ones say 'take me.' There are other eggs, and they're made of silver and gold, and they have jewels on them, and those are the eggs that say 'don't take me.' So even though she wanted to take just one of the jeweled or gold eggs, she didn't take any because they said 'don't take me.' She only took the ones that said 'take me.' So she goes on her way, and about halfway home, she takes one of the eggs, and she throws it over her right shoulder, and out of it spills beautiful dresses. And then she goes a little farther, and she tosses another egg over her shoulder, and there are coins, and then more eggs she tosses over her shoulders. There are rubies and diamonds, and the last egg that she tosses over her shoulder springs up into a carriage with a little pony that started from the size of a cricket and grew up into a pony, and it was to draw the carriage. So she loads all the things, all these beautiful things, into the carriage, and goes on her way home. Now, when she gets to her house, Blanche's mother and her sister Rose, they can barely believe that she has all these things. They don't know where she got all these things from. So her mother has Rose help Blanche carry all of her stuff in, and her mother starts being very nice to her, and she cooks dinner for them, and it's the first time that Blanche could even remember her mother cooking dinner for them ever since she was old enough to hold a skillet herself. She's always had to cook dinner. So her mom is very nice to her, and she tells her what a sweet little girl she is, and how she was sorry that she yelled at her. And she gets Blanche to tell her about the old woman in the woods, and that's where she got all these things from. So the mother, so that's where she got all these things from. Now, Blanche is very tired, so she goes off to bed, and her mother takes Rose aside, and she says, "Rose, you have to go to that cabin in the woods. You have to find that little old woman, and we're going to get more stuff. And after you get some stuff, then I'm going to run Blanche out of here. I'm going to chase her out of the house, and I'm going to take her stuff, and then we'll go off to the city, and we'll live like fine ladies, like we were always meant to do." And so Rose starts whining, and she says, "Oh, I don't want to have to do that. Why don't we just take Blanche's stuff and split that?" And the mom says, "There's not near enough stuff for both of us. We need more stuff." So the next morning comes around, and Rose goes off reluctantly because she doesn't want to have to find the old woman. But she does end up running into the old woman who's wandering around the woods again. And Rose can be very sneaky when she knows what she wants. So she says very nicely to the woman, she says, "Oh, my dear little sister Blanche was over your house yesterday, and she told us about what a nice place you had and what a nice woman you were. And I was hoping that I could come and take a look at your house myself." And so the old woman says, "Well, you know, if you'd really like to, that's fine. But you have to promise that no matter what you see, you won't laugh." And so Rose says, "Oh, yeah, of course, I won't laugh. That's no problem." So they go to the old woman's house. And Rose sees the two-headed cow with corkscrew horns and who brays like a mule. And Rose starts cracking up. She thinks it's hilarious. And the cow looks a little sad. And the woman just says, And then Rose sees the chickens that are all multicolored. And they have all different numbers of legs. And they whistle like mockingbirds. And Rose says, "Oh, that is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. What kind of house is this?" And she's laughing and making fun of this. And the old woman says, And so then they go inside, and the old woman gives Rose a ham bone to boil. And Rose takes the ham bone. She says, "What, are you crazy? This isn't going to make a very good meal for either of us, let alone both of us." And she tosses the bone in the pot, and it made a thin broth, and nothing happened with the bone, and so they had a pretty lousy broth for soup. And the old woman gives her a grain of rice, and she says, "Pound this, grind this in the mortar." And Rose takes the grain of rice, and she says, "What, are you crazy? This would barely feed a fly. I'm not even going to bother grinding that. That's crazy." And so they ate very little because all they had was the very thin beef broth, and they both went to bed hungry. And there were screech owls near the windows that they could hear that night, and wolves they could hear howling in the distance. Well, the next morning they get up, and the old woman says to Rose, she says, "You know, you saw my cow when you came in. Go milk my cow, and we'll have some milk for our coffee." And so Rose went out, but she was still making fun of the cow, and the cow gave the most sour milk ever, and it wasn't even fit for drinking. So they had to drink their coffee without any cream. And then, oh, yeah, so then they drink their coffee, and the old woman says, "Oh, you know, it's about time. Maybe you should be going back to your house." And the old woman takes her head off to start combing her hair, but as soon as she sets her head on her lap, Rose grabs the old woman's head, and she says, "I know that you gave my sister presents, and I want presents too. So I'm going to hold your head unless you tell me where all those presents came from." And so the old woman says, "You're a wicked little girl, but I need my body back in one piece, so I'll tell you what to do." And she says, "You go out to that chicken pen, and and some of the eggs will say, 'Take me,' and only take the eggs that say, 'Take me.' If the eggs say, 'Don't take me,' then don't take those eggs. Leave those eggs. And please give me my head back." But Rose holds the head captive because she doesn't want the old woman to, come back and chase her. So she takes the head out with her and sets it on the porch. And then she goes to the chicken coop, and she sees all these eggs. And only the plain chicken eggs say, "Take me." And then there's these ones that are gold and silver, and they have jewels on them and rubies, and they say, "Don't take me." And she's like, "What, are you crazy? I'm taking the eggs with the jewels on them. I'm taking the gold and silver eggs." And so she takes all the prettiest eggs, all the ones that are saying, "Don't take me, don't take me." And she leaves all the plain eggs that say, "Take me." And then she goes out in the woods. Now, halfway to her home, she takes the eggs, and something I forgot to mention, the old woman had told her to throw the eggs over her right shoulder as she was walking home. So Rose takes some of these eggs with the jewels on them. She tosses one over her right shoulder, and it's a toad. And she says, oh, well, that's disgusting. That's so gross. I hate toads. So she takes another one. She tosses it out. And it's a snake. And these animals start chasing her. And the more eggs she tosses, the more wretched creatures just come out of them. There's a wolf and snakes and toads and all sorts of vermin and real scary animals that are chasing her. And so she runs through the woods, and she runs all the way home, and she's yelling, she's screaming bloody murder because all these animals are chasing her. And her mom hears her, and so she runs out of the cabin. And then the animals start chasing the mom and Rose, and they chase them all through the woods. And finally, Rose and her mother are able to lose all these terrible creatures, and they just get home and they're panting, and they're so exhausted they've been running through the forest all day. So they get back to their cabin, only to find that Blanche has taken her things and gotten in her carriage and went off to the city to live like a fine lady. But she was always very kind and very generous because she did have a good heart, and that was in her nature to be that way. But the old woman and Rose, no matter how hard they looked, they could never find that old woman again. And they lived in their little cabin, and they were pretty miserable out there. The end.